Good afternoon, good evening, however it may find you when you watch this, or however you are in time when you see it. It is morning for me, a little before 9 a.m. Eastern. Today I'm going to be talking about community. And this is something that I think a lot of people really get caught up in because I hear every single day, I'm not exaggerating, every single day I hear somebody say, well, that's not good for me. These people aren't good for me, so they isolate. Now, there's a difference in an avoidant person and a person who willfully isolates. They're both avoiding something, but one is making a decision to cut someone out. The other is just working out of a nervous system issue. And honestly, maybe they're the same thing. But I'll tell you this, there's never been a time where I've met a human being who could say, you know what, I'm better off by myself. I mean, I hear people say that, but human beings are not designed for isolation. I mean, they need community. They need, belonging, the experience of being genuinely known within a group of people who share something significant, right? I mean, this is not a preference or a luxury. It is a structural requirement of a healthy human life. The research on isolation is unambiguous. The experience of belonging is connected to mental health, physical health, longevity, energy, quality of the mind, and cognitive function. So community is not some nice addition to a good life. It is one of the conditions that are required for a good life. And I start here because what follows is an examination of when community becomes something other than what it is meant to be. And I want that examination to be received against the background of full respect for the genuine human need that community addresses. The problem, if I can say, that I'm describing is not community itself. It is the specific dynamic that emerges when the belonging that community provides comes at the cost of the self that is doing the belonging. Real community holds the individual. It makes space for the full person. It provides belonging that does not require the suppression of the parts of the self that do not fit the community's preferred image. It can handle disagreement, difference, misunderstanding, the complicated version of its members without the community's structural integrity being threatened. A community of this quality is one of the most valuable things available in a human life, and it is rarer than it should be, honestly. But the community that becomes a cage is one whose belonging is conditional. Conditional belonging is belonging that is available when specific terms are met and withdrawn explicitly, or implicitly when they're not, okay? When these terms are not met. So the terms are rarely stated clearly. They're communicated through the warmth that is present when a person aligns with the values of that particular community, and I'll just say coolness that arrives when they do not. Through the recognition that is given to the person who performs the identity correctly and the subtle distancing from the person who departs from it. And we see this in the family dynamic. There are people who will your own relatives will just not engage with you because they just don't want to, because they'd rather listen to what the narration is rather than know the real reality. Sometimes a community, through the stories the community tells about people who have left, which almost always cast the departure as a form of failure or betrayal or some type of regression, especially spiritual regression. A person in a community of conditional belonging is a prisoner. They are not free, even if the conditions are ones they currently meet, because meeting them requires monitoring them, requires the continuous management of self in relation to the community standard, requires the suppression of the parts that do not align, and the suppression is the cage, not the community itself. The self-editing that the conditional belonging requires, maintained over time, produces exactly the same dynamic as every other mask in this series, a version of the self that is deployed in the community and a version that lives underneath it, unexpressed, unshared, growing increasingly uncertain whether it will be welcome if it arrived. Go to my blog yesterday, August 25th, 2026, and look at the essay that I wrote about an essay that I wrote some 14 days before I had, or some 3 weeks before I had my lowest point in life. The specific mechanisms of conditional belonging need to be understood because they're subtle enough to be mistaken for genuine community at the level of felt experience. I mean, the warmth is real and feels genuine. The language is shared and it feels real. The feeling of being understood is real. What is not real is the understanding. Is that the understanding extends to the full person. The community understands the portion of you that aligns with its framework. The rest is implicitly asked to remain offstage or transform. And the person who has been in the community long enough has often learned, without ever really being told explicitly, exactly which portions of themselves can be brought forward and which must remain behind. So the cost of this learning, and it's real, and it is a very, very, very real cost, is the development of a community self that is distinct from the actual self. Not dramatically different. Honestly, it's often similar enough that the person themselves don't notice the distinction, but different enough that the experience of being in the community is the experience of being in a room where a certain portion of who you are is not welcome. And the belonging, however warm, is the belonging of the portion that the community approves, which means the true self underneath the portion has never arrived in that community and is not welcome. Has never been fully known by it. There's a cost. Some people say, well, I could just sit. This is okay. It works for me. Well, the cost of staying in a cage community is rarely catastrophic. That's the thing. Not in the obvious sense anyway. The community provides real things like warmth, purpose, support, alignment in certain values, in certain moments, belonging to something larger than the individual. And these things are not nothing, okay? They are significant. And the person who recognizes that the community is conditioning their belonging faces a genuine tension in this sense. Leave and lose the real things that it provides, or stay and continue to pay the cost that the self-editing requires. The tension is not simple, and I'm not going to simplify it by suggesting that the answer is to leave. I don't think that it always is. Sometimes the answer is to stay, and this includes relationships, which is not part of this conversation, is to stay and to begin bringing more of the real self into the community gradually and honestly, and to discover whether the community can expand to hold more than it was holding. And sometimes the community that you're in, when tested with more of the actual person, reveals a capacity for that person that the person had not really discovered because they'd never tried, right? It's the fear of, rather than just doing. And sometimes it reveals clearly that the capacity is not there on the other side, that the belonging is genuinely conditional and that the condition is not negotiable. And then the person who is living in a place of clarity has better information for a clear decision. But the cost of staying without testing is worth naming clearly. A person who remains in a caged community, who has recognized the conditionality, but who chooses for the genuine goods the community provides to continue to meet the terms, is making a choice. And it is a choice worth making with full awareness, because the self-editing accumulates, stacks up, and comes to the bill table, to the payment table. The suppressed portions of the self grow quieter over time, not because they disappear, not because they just no longer exist. I mean, these things really exist, but what happens is they have been consistently asked to wait, and the person who has been consistently editing themselves in the direction of the community's preferences over years will eventually find it very difficult to locate what is theirs as distinct from what the community has shaped. I've talked about this a couple of weeks ago in a different form. Let's talk about belonging that is free. I mean, what does it look like? Belonging that is genuinely free is belonging that does not require the suppression of any actual part of you. It is the experience of being in a community where the full person, including the parts that complicate the narrative or the preferred narrative of a particular people, is always welcome. Not perfectly, Communities are composed of imperfect people, and no community holds every member fully at the time, all the time. But the orientation of the community, the trajectory of what it is trying to hold, and what kind of belonging it is trying to provide matters enormously. A community that is oriented toward genuine belonging will have a specific quality in its response to disagreement and difference. It will be curious rather than defensive. It will ask questions rather than immediately mobilizing the framework to address the departing view. It will make room for the complicated version of its members rather than only for the version that confirms the community's identity. And it will measure its health not by the conformity of its members, but by the genuine development of each unique person within it, even in a little bit of chaos or misalignment. This kind of community is not utopian. It is possible. It does exist. Finding it or building it or moving an existing community toward it is some of the most valuable things you can do as a human being. Because belonging that is free is one of the most powerful conditions for true identity and genuine development of that person. It provides the experience of being known in truth, which is one of the things human beings need most, without requiring the suppression or the transformation of the self that is doing the belonging. And the person who has that experience, even once, with even one other person or a small group of people, has a reference point that changes what they're willing to accept as belonging in every other context of their life for the rest of their life. The cage is not the community. The cage is the condition. And you're not required to continue paying a condition for belonging that should not have been a price. So think about these things and let me know what you think. I'm James. This is Unbound, Freedom for Life.